Okay, so we're starting Siman Yud Tes. With this, I'm not sure if this is the final chapter or the near to the end of the chapter, because we're getting to the very end of the halachos, and then we'll go over the next two sections of the Sefer, which we'll make a decision whether we want to go further in depth or whether we want to go on to the next subject. Okay, mutar lemishulach lakachas la'atzmo chelak mima shegava letovas hamosad. So this is Hilchos Gova HaTzedakah, the laws of collecting tzedakah. And part of the halachos of collecting tzedakah are, what's my take? Or what am I entitled to take? So if a person is a meshulach for tzedakah, he's hired as an executive director, which is a fancy title for the schnorrer of the organization. So he's hired to collect tzedakah for the organization. He is entitled to take a percentage of what he has collected for the organization, la'achar shenika et hahotzaot shelo, after deducting his expenses. So first he deducts his expenses, and then he can take a percentage of what he collected. Kagon, nisiya, achila shtiya lina v'chayotzeva. So the flight or travel expenses, food, lodging, etc., v'chayotzeva, and all other expenses. Yesh, good morning. Yesh mi shamater lakachas ad esrim v'chamisha achuzim. Some say you can take up to 25%. V'yesh mi shamater ad shlish, and some say you can take up to a third. V'yesh mi shamater ad shloshim v'chamisha achuzim. There's another opinion that permits you to take 35%. V'yesh mi shamater lakachat arba'im v'tisha achuzim. And there's even an opinion who lets you take 49%. That's a pretty big cut. Okay. So who is he quoting from these farms? So Rav Kanievsky was of the opinion, this is the father, this was the Stipler Gaon. They quote him as saying that you could give him up to 35% of the money that he collects after expenses, which could come up to even more than 50%, depending on what his expenses were. The higher numbers, one of them comes from Rav Scheinberg. Rav Scheinberg has said up to 25%, and that's an appropriate percentage. Yoser mizem muter di'evet at 50%. He said if you want to take more, then that's not optimal, but you could take up to 50%. Shamati mito kain mishmei demar nachazanish zatzalim ki lo yadati heter lazeicha shebevadi matarim hayodea kain lo hayatarim ad kam losham. So Rav Scheinberg says a very interesting thing. He says that if the donor would know that such a high percentage is being kept by the tzedakah collector for personal use and not for the organization, if you would assess that he would not give that amount, so then he's not allowed to collect. He's not allowed to cut so far into the expenses. Look, we all know that people don't work for free. And if somebody is hired as, let's say we just had this Magen David Adon. We know Herschel Recht is a very hardworking guy. He's entitled to take a percentage of whatever he raises. I don't know whether he's a salaried employee. He's a salaried employee, yeah, as opposed to a percentage, right? But if a person says, I want to donate $1 million to Magen David Adon, do we tell him that, I'm just making up a number. What if the principal, what if the salary arrangement is he gets a base salary and then a percentage of whatever he brings in? I think I, as a donor, would say 2%, 3%. That to me makes sense as a bonus on top of his salary. And of course, we also know that my $1 million donation, so deducted from that is operating expenses for the Canadian Friends Office. Deducted from that is whatever expenses went into making the dinner that inspired me to donate the $1 million, right? I mean, we have to be realistic. And deducted from that might be another 2 or 3% to go to the executive director as a bonus for bringing in this donation. I think that most people would say that's an acceptable amount to skim off my $1 million donation. There are people who actually say, I want to donate whatever it is, $1 million, but I want to make sure that every penny of that $1 million goes to Israel, or is going to the purchase of that, of the ambulance, or whatever it is. That is the prerogative of the charity to either accept that donation or to change the terms. They'd have to negotiate that. But what you're seeing that's very important from this footnote is that if the donor were to discover that the person who's the director, the collector of the tzedakah is getting such a high percentage he would not wish to give, then you're not really allowed to take off that much. And that's a very subjective criterion, but certainly if I knew that 50% of what I'm giving to this guy is going to his driver, right, which is some of the stories that you're hearing these days, is that guys come to town and they hire this fellow who's a driver. We know him because he comes and sits and davens with us quite often. If I don't know how much he's getting, but if he's getting half, it makes me very uncomfortable giving any kind of charitable donation. So, I'll give $1, it's not going to kill me whether he gets 50 cents or $1, but it does bother me that the expenses of someone coming to collect from Eretz Yisrael, he's only taking back after you deduct the expenses and how much he has to pay to his driver and other people, he's getting less than 50% of every dollar, that he's coming here for. And so it's very, very troublesome that this is the way it works. Okay, so in any event, we really don't know where these percentages come from. I don't know that there really isn't. When you look at the footnotes, there is really no basis in Shulchan Aruch to determine how much a fellow is allowed to take when he's the tzedakah collector. And he quotes from Shevet Halevi from Rav Vosner. He says, "Hinei mi'ikar." I'm just looking at the footnote number 3. "Hinei mi'ikar hadin tzarich lasos hamitzvah bechinam." He says, well, anyone who's a tzedakah collector should really say, I have to do this mitzvah for free. Because what right do I have to charge to do a mitzvah? Imlo misha parnasaso miza, unless this is your parnasa. In other words, there are 2 types of tzedakah collectors. People who volunteer for an organization and do fundraising. That's the right way to do it. But then there are organizations that advertise, we need a full-time director. We need a person who's going to be in charge of our financial operations and is going to do fundraising for us. We can't subsist purely on volunteers. Well, if that's the case, then he is allowed to take a salary if that's his job description. Because that's sort of like Dayane Gezeros Shebirushalayim. That's the Dayanim in Yerushalayim used to take a salary because they had to work full time in order to supervise the halachic edicts that were taking place in the city. Mihu Pashut, Dimyesh Chashash Bittel HaMitzvah Yidei Sheina Lokech Schar Betela, Mutav Sheyikach Schar Bittel Zmana. Clearly, if there's a concern that the organization will fold because no one's willing to do the fundraising for them for free, then obviously they're allowed to pay their fundraiser. V'ayin b'knesses hagdola Choshen Mishpat Siman Shem Lamed Aleph Bahaga Shekasav Dehar Regilut Haya Lekabel Shlish O Revia Ad Kam L'Shana. He quotes actually from Bahaga. apparently he's quoting from the Knesset Hagdolah, which goes back at least to the 18th century, if not further, that it was normal for the fundraiser to collect a third or a quarter of whatever he collected. And so that was the tradition. But more than that, we don't really see a basis for it. Okay. Halacha Beis. Look, I'm not sure if we should dwell on this subject, but it does get in your craw. This really does bother me that some charities, when you think you're giving to the charity, you're really giving more to the person who's collecting. So it is, okay. Tzarech lamod bifnei gova hatzdaka. You have to stand up in the presence of a person who's collecting tzedakah, just like you have to kamo bifnei kolos mitzvah, just like you have to stand up for anyone who's in the process of doing a mitzvah. It's showing honor to the mitzvah. Unless he's collecting for himself or is being paid for his fundraising, then you don't have to stand for him because he's not doing a mitzvah. In other words, a guy who's collecting tzedakah on his own behalf is not doing a mitzvah. But if he's collecting tzedakah on behalf of, let's say, a charitable organization, like Magen David Adom, a yeshiva, a hospital, an orphanage, etc., and he's doing it for free, so then you have to stand in his presence out of a sign of respect because he's in the midst of doing a mitzvah, which is a fascinating halacha. So how are you supposed to know? Well, in general, I guess the guys who, and this is quoting the Pischei Tshuva, which is a very reputable source, I guess the way, most guys who come into shul after davening are not collecting for a charitable organization for free. But if someone tells you, I'm coming into town, I'm a physician, and I'm collecting for the hospital where I work, I'm just doing volunteer work, and I'm not taking a penny from the hospital, except they've paid for my flight. They've just paid my travel expenses, but otherwise I'm not taking a penny from the hospital. So that person is doing a mitzvah. You have to stand in his presence. V'yesh mi shepasak shemasha amru she'ein tzarich lamod bifnei hagoyva b'schar u'rak keshuhu shaliach legabot ma shemanhigei hakehila hitilu al hakahal. And some say that which we say that you don't have to stand in front of a person who's being paid for his fundraising effort is only when Keshuhu shaliach legabot, when he's been sent to collect mashe manhigei hakehila hitilu hakahal. He's been sent to collect whatever collection has been placed upon the community to collect. Aval misha tafkido l'shachnei sheyitnu kigon meshulach. He says, in other words, if he's coming to the members of the community, say it's time to pay up your membership to the community organization, so that's not a person you have to stand up for, especially if he's getting paid. But if he's a professional fundraiser and his job is to convince people to give tzedakah to a charitable organization, not just like their membership to the community fund, ubichlal ose mitzvah. So he's included in a mitzvah performer. Because let's face it, just because he's getting a salary doesn't mean that he's a bad guy. The thing is, he's chosen a noble profession. He's chosen to do something noble with his life. He could have been a banker, a stockbroker, a mailman. He could have chosen to do whatever he wanted to do. But he said, but when the yeshiva came to him and said, we need an executive director, he said, okay, I'll raise money for you. I'll run the operations of the yeshiva. I'll make the difficult phone calls, and I'll ask people to donate to the yeshiva. Like we have the fellow Jeff Toledano, who's in our community. He didn't have to be an executive director of a yeshiva. He could have done whatever. He could have gone into private industry, but he decided this is what he wants to do. He wants to dedicate his life to helping a yeshiva, which I think is a very noble thing, right? So if a person decides to do that, According to this opinion, you'd have to stand up for him while he's doing his act of collecting, even if he gets a salary for it. But nowadays, we're more lenient and we generally don't stand. Who is he quoting from that? He's quoting the Tshuvas V'Hanhagas, Rav Sternbach. But apparently Diane Weiss felt that a person who dedicates himself to being a fundraiser should be shown proper respect. Okay. Next halacha. Nahagim, drivers. Shemakirim et ktovot migorei hanedivim. They know where all the wealthy people live. They have a list. Okay. Vetzmanei hakabbalah shelahem. They also know their hours. In other words, they many times charitable donors set up hours. You know, you can come on Sunday from 2 to 4 p.m. That's when I'm available. And they happen to know the inside scoop, and they're able to guide the Meshulachim who come from out of town. And so they'll drive around these guys who come from Eretz Yisrael and other places. And current practice is for them to take a third of the cut. Despite the fact that one should consider whether it is yosher and tzedek, whether it is uprightness and justice for them to take such a large cut, but a meshulach who tries to weasel his way out of his obligation to his driver, if that was the original convention that was set, you pay me a third of whatever you take in, and the guy says no, it's too much, he has no basis to defend that position to get out of paying what he had originally negotiated or what was the accepted convention for payment. So I don't know where this number comes from. It just happens to be a convention. And it's really a bit of a mystery. Maybe we should take a look at this tshuva from Rav Vosner in Shevet HaLevi. Maybe I'll take a look at that. So there's a whole tshuva on drivers. On the convention is when this sefer was written, and when the tshuva was written, probably within the last 50 years, the convention was the driver gets a 33.33% cut of everything that the guy collects, which is a huge amount of money. It's a huge cut. I mean, a guy, not only could he make a nice salary off of that, but consider he's probably raking in thousands and thousands of dollars a week. He's probably making more than a lot of people who are giving tzedakah. Exactly. That's right. That's right. No, I don't think so. Yeah. Now, I had heard that in some places, perhaps even in Toronto, the cut is 50%, which to me is outrageous. So your homework assignment is, next time you become friendly with a meshulach, ask him, how much are you paying your driver? Like what percentage are you giving him? I'll try to do the same. Try to find out. So it's uncomfortable, this halacha. Anyone in TV land want to make a comment? No? Okay. Okay.
I don't like it either.
You don't like it, Wayne. Okay, thank you for that input. For the
The
do they
least I
have
can
that
do is support you.
do they have it in Jerusalem also, this policy? I mean, I guess this is where the Sefer was written, and this is the Chuvas are coming from Yerushalayim. But I don't know if they have the same kind of, I don't think so, because everyone's local that collects in Yerushalayim. No one comes from out of town to Yerushalayim specifically to collect.
Well, they may be like collecting for themselves a lot more here. But,
Yeah.
It's an interesting
All right.
thing.
Go ahead.
I never really understand how online and American work currency is so radically and the population is radically what they could possibly
Right.
currency. I never understood.
Yeah, Joby's questioning how it is or why it is that people come from New York to Toronto, especially when our currency is worth significantly less. I guess because we have a lot of wealthy donors in Toronto, and it's worth their while. I don't think that their main reason for coming is to go to the shul and to collect the $20 that they'll get after Minyan. I think their main reason, $20 Canadian, right? I think their main reason is that they're, especially down south, there are many, many wealthy donors who are very sympathetic and will give, larger amounts.
Much more money than that. Less people and less currency.
Well, I suppose, those markets, you could say those markets are already saturated. So maybe some people feel, let me go to Canada. It's not as a saturated market. I don't know. Okay. All right. Halacha Daled. Im hanedivim matnim tenai benetinatam shenotnim. Let's say the donor makes a condition with the fundraiser. Shenotnim al menat shelo yitnu hameshulachim chelak hagadol shel shlish lenahagim. He says, I'm giving you this donation on the condition that you don't pay the third to your driver. In other words, what I'm telling you to do is, I'm going to give you $100. You tell the guy that either I didn't give you anything or that you only got $5 from me. Okay. I'm only giving you $100 if you get to keep the $100. I'm not interested in giving you $67 and $33 goes to your driver. Not only that, I don't like the guy. I think he's gouging the public and I don't want to support him. So that's my condition. Take it or leave it. So ein la meshulachim manos milahagid beferish lanedivim shehem kivulim im heskem haschirus lasei shlish lanahag shalahem kifi shehitnu itam merosh. He says the fundraiser, the meshulach, has no option. He has to express verbally to the donor that I am bound to a contract. I have made a contract with my driver that I have to pay him a third of whatever I collect. I can't take anything under the table. Under the table. In other words, the donation is under the table, but I can't make it under the table so that my driver doesn't get any percentage of it. I'm not allowed to. Okay. And who is he quoting here? That's again from Rav Vosner. Okay. Okay. Now, next, Bishas mechiras ha'aliyos l'Torah. When people are selling aliyot in the synagogue or any honor, like we do before Simchas Torah, like a lot of places do on a regular basis. Asur lomar shehu muchan latet sikum gadol kishe'eno mitkaven liknot et hamitzvah. You're not allowed to bid for a mitzvah without knowing very well that you have no intention of buying the mitzvah. Ella rak lahalos es mechir kedei lahashir es kupas beis hakneses. But your objective is to enrich the synagogue by pressuring the guy who really wants the aliyah to pay more for it. So you're putting in a false bid, or it's a bid under false pretenses. You're not allowed to do that. So if you know that there's someone in the shul who's going to bid for a particular honor, he buys it every year, like he buys the psicha for Ne'ilah every year, and you know that you can get him to raise his bid, but you have no intention of buying it yourself. I mean, I've heard stories of this, of where the guy who would regularly buy it got so fed up because people were jacking up the amount that he just backed out at the last minute and he left it up to the other guy to buy it, and he got stuck with it. Okay. V'zeh iser hona'a shemerameh anashim latet al smach netina shelo hayta v'lo nivra. And this is under the rubric of ona'ah, which we've talked about before. Ona'ah is where you do anything to harm or people, either verbally, and here you're harming someone verbally because you're misrepresenting your intent to give, when in reality you have actually no intent to give, and you're just causing another person to have to pay more money. Ve'ein hatoreim sherimu oto chayav l'shalem. And we'll go even further. If it's discovered after the fact that the person who won the bid was forced to have the price jacked up so much because of a false bidder, he legally, al pi halacha, does not have an obligation to pay the pledge. She'ilu yada et ha'emet lo haya notein sikum gadol, because if he would have known that they're artificially jacking up the bid, then he would never have given that large amount. In other words, if I knew that I was the only real bidder in this situation, and people were falsely bidding without any intent of buying it, but just to get me to pay more to the shul, I never would have paid that amount of money. I could have gotten it for half that amount. But some say that the donor has to examine the inner thoughts of his heart. In other words, really do a self-analysis. If he comes to the conclusion that he would have given that amount, even with the knowledge that people were playing a trick on him, because after all, it's going to the synagogue anyway. So then he would have to pay his pledge. So one thing is clear: anyone who artificially bids without real intent of purchasing, but just to inflate the final price, is performing an Isser Ona'ah, which is an Isser De'oraisa. There's a shaila whether or not the guy who won the bid under false pretenses is chayiv to pay or not. Some say he's not chayiv to pay, and some say that he should really think about it, quoting Rav Zilberstein, think about it. If you would have given the money anyway to the shul, whether or not they would have deceived you, then you should still honor your pledge. In other words, because you know it's going to the shul. Are you happy to give that money to the shul? Yeah. Are you happy that you were duped into doing it in this way? No. But are you happy to give that amount to the shul? Yes, so then you should give it to the shul. Okay. So that has to do with bidding. All right, so let's see. So we talked about percentages. We talked about drivers' percentages. And now we're talking about deceiving a donor based on, a false auction. Okay. Next. Yesh mi shepasak shemisha asaf kesef l'chalek la'aniyim rashai lakacha la'atzmo mima shegava keshehu atzmo nitzrach v'yesh mi she'oser la'asos kain. What if a guy goes around? Classic case would be he goes around on Purim collecting matanos la'aniyim for various different poor people. What if he realizes, hey, I qualify as an ani as well? can he take a percentage for himself? So according to one opinion, he may, and according to another opinion, he may not. What's the machlokas here? So the opinion that says he may is Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, and the opinion that says he cannot is Rav Scheinberg. So maybe we'll take a look later on in the Sefer. We have tshuvas about this. Maybe we'll take a look at that. Mirz Hashem tomorrow. Okay, we'll hold it here for today.